I never thought I'd be the guy who ended up on the wrong side of an HOA board. But then again, I never imagined someone would literally try to steal my heating system and then call the police when I sent them a bill for it. My name is Wesley Lawson, and I've been living in my house in Scottsdale, Arizona, for about 8 years now. It's a nice 3-bedroom ranch with solar panels I installed myself, and a geothermal heating and cooling system that cost me about $40,000 to put in 3 years ago. The geothermal system was a major investment, but given Arizona's brutal summers and surprisingly cold winter nights, it paid for itself pretty quickly in energy savings. I work as an HVAC engineer, so I knew exactly what I was doing when I designed and installed the system. It's probably the most efficient setup in the entire Sunset Ridge HOA community. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in January when I was enjoying my coffee and checking my email before heading to work. My doorbell rang at 7:30, which was unusual because I don't get many visitors, especially not that early. I opened the door to find Brenda Patterson standing on my porch with her tablet in hand, and that pinched expression she always wore when she was about to ruin someone's day. Brenda was the HOA president, a woman in her early 50s with that specific Karen haircut where it's short in the back and longer in the front, dyed an unnatural shade of blonde. She wore designer athleisure wear despite never actually exercising, and had a collection of oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Wesley, we need to discuss something important," she said without any greeting, already tapping on her tablet. "Good morning to you too, Brenda. What can I help you with? I'm here on official HOA business. We've been having issues with the heating system at the community center, and the board has decided that since you have that fancy geothermal system, you should share it with the community." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. "Share my heating system? Brenda, that's not how geothermal works. It's specific to my property." She looked up from her tablet with narrowed eyes. "The community center is only 200 feet from your property line. We've consulted with someone who says it's absolutely possible to extend your system to heat the center. It's for the good of the community, Wesley." "Who exactly did you consult? Because as an HVAC engineer, I'm telling you that's not happening. My system is designed for my house. It can't just be extended to another building." "Well, the board has already voted on it, and we expect your cooperation. The community center is used by everyone in the neighborhood, and we pay HOA fees specifically for this kind of shared benefit." I felt my jaw tightening. "Brenda, my heating system has nothing to do with HOA fees. I paid for it with my own money. It's my private property. According to Section 12 of the HOA bylaws, any improvements that could benefit the community can be utilized for community purposes. We'll need access to your system by the end of the week. Section 12 is about shared walls and common areas in townhouses, which this neighborhood doesn't even have. It doesn't apply to private heating systems." The answer is no. Her face flushed red. "We'll see about that. The board will be in touch." She turned and marched back to her white Escalade parked in my driveway, leaving tire marks on the concrete as she peeled out. I stood there for a moment, genuinely confused about what had just happened. In all my years dealing with this HOA, Brenda had been annoying but never outright delusional. I called my buddy Marcus, who lived 3 streets over and had been on the HOA board until last year when he got tired of the drama. "You're not going to believe what Brenda just tried to pull," I said when he answered. After I explained the situation, Marcus let out a long whistle. "Man, I warned you she was getting worse. After I left the board, she packed it with her friends. They've been doing whatever they want." Last month, they tried to fine the Rodriguez family for having their kid's basketball hoop in the driveway. Can she actually force me to share my heating system? Hell no. That's insane, but she'll make your life difficult. Document everything, and if she keeps pushing, you might need to lawyer up. I thanked Marcus and headed to work, figuring that would be the end of it. Brenda would realize how ridiculous her demand was, and we'd all move on. I was wrong. That evening when I got home, I noticed my side gate was open. I always kept it locked because it led to my backyard where all my HVAC equipment was located. My stomach dropped as I walked around the side of the house. There were two men I didn't recognize standing in my backyard with toolboxes, examining my geothermal system's exterior components. One of them was actually taking measurements, while the other was photographing everything with his phone. "Hey, what the hell are you doing in my yard?" I shouted, jogging over. The older one, a guy in his 60s with a weathered face, looked up casually. "HOA sent us to assess the system for extension to the community center." "Get out, now, you're trespassing." The younger one, maybe in his 30s, stepped forward. "Look, man, we're just doing our job. The HOA hired us." "I don't care who hired you. This is my private property and you don't have permission to be here. Leave immediately or I'm calling the police." The older guy shrugged and started packing up his tools. "No problem. We got what we needed anyway." "What you needed? You had no right to be here in the first place." They walked past me without another word, leaving through the side gate. I immediately checked the lock and found it had been cut. Someone had literally cut my lock to let these people into my yard. I took photos of everything, including the cut lock, and then checked my security camera footage. I'd installed cameras 6 months ago after some packages went missing in the neighborhood. The footage showed Brenda herself arriving an hour before I got home, cutting the lock with bolt cutters and letting the two men into my yard. She'd waited in her car while they worked, then left before I arrived. I couldn't believe she'd actually committed breaking and entering, and I had it all on video. I immediately called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The officer who came out, a young woman named Officer Chen, took my statement and watched the security footage. "That's pretty clear-cut trespassing and property damage," she said, making notes. "Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely. She can't just break into my property." "I'll write up the report. You should also get a restraining order if she continues to harass you." After Officer Chen left, I sent an email to the entire HOA board, attaching the security footage and explaining what had happened. I made it clear that my heating system was off limits, that I had filed a police report against Brenda, and that any further trespassing would result in additional legal action. Within 20 minutes, my phone started ringing. It was Brenda. "How dare you call the police on me?" She shrieked the moment I answered. "I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to access any property for community purposes." "No, Brenda, you absolutely do not. What you did was illegal. You broke my lock and let strangers into my yard without permission. You're being selfish. The community center's heating system is broken, and it's going to cost $15,000 to replace. Your system could heat both buildings easily. That's not my problem. And no, my system cannot heat both buildings. It's specifically designed for my house's square footage and insulation. Even if I wanted to help, which I don't after what you just pulled, it's physically impossible. The board will fine you for non-compliance." "Fine me for what? Not letting you steal my heating system? Go ahead, I'll see you in court." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. I'd never been one for confrontation, but this was beyond ridiculous. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. According to the notice, I was being fined $500 for failure to maintain community standards and refusal to cooperate with HOA improvement initiatives. The notice claimed I had 30 days to comply or face additional fines of $500 per day. I took a photo of the notice and forwarded it to my attorney, David Rothman, who I'd used when I bought the house. He called me back within an hour. "Wesley, this is completely unenforceable," David said. "They can't fine you for refusing to let them use your private heating system. This isn't even close to legal. So what do I do? I'll send them a cease and desist letter today. If they continue, we'll file a lawsuit against the HOA and Brenda personally. Keep documenting everything." David's letter must have hit a nerve because 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, some guy named Richard Blackwell from a small firm in Phoenix. The letter claimed that according to my deed and the HOA covenants, all property improvements were subject to community use as determined by the board. It demanded I provide access to my geothermal system within 14 days or face legal action. I forwarded this to David, who actually laughed when he called me back. "Their attorney is either incompetent or didn't bother reading your actual deed. There's no such provision." I'm going to reply and CC the State Bar Association because this is borderline ethical violation territory, threatening legal action based on non-existent contract terms. Things were quiet for almost a week after that, and I started to hope the situation was resolved. Then I came home from work on a Friday to find my heat wasn't working. The house was cold, way colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat and it was set correctly, but no heat was coming through the vents. I went outside to check the system and immediately saw the problem. Someone had shut off the main power supply to my geothermal unit and had put a padlock on the electrical disconnect box. I was furious. I grabbed my bolt cutters from the garage and removed the lock, then restored power to the system. The unit hummed back to life, and I could hear my heat pump starting up. I checked the security cameras and felt my blood pressure spike. The footage showed Brenda and 2 men I didn't recognize entering my yard at noon, 3 hours before I got home. One of the men shut off my system while the other installed the padlock. Then, all 3 of them walked across my yard toward the community center, dragging heavy electrical cables with them. I walked toward the community center, following the path they'd taken in the video, and discovered something that made the whole situation even worse. They had actually attempted to connect cables from my geothermal system's outdoor unit to the community center. The cables were lying across the grass, running about 150 feet from my property to the center's mechanical room. Someone had tried to jury-rig a connection that would have been dangerous and definitely wouldn't have worked the way they thought. I took extensive photos and videos of everything, then called Officer Chen again. This time, when she arrived with her partner, Officer Martinez, they both looked seriously concerned. "This is now multiple counts of trespassing, vandalism, and attempted theft of services," Officer Chen said. "This cable setup could have caused serious damage or even a fire. We need to bring Miss Patterson in for questioning. She's probably at the community center right now. There's some kind of weekend event happening," I told them. The officers headed over to the community center while I stayed at my house. About 30 minutes later, I saw Brenda being led to a patrol car in handcuffs. She was screaming loud enough that I could hear her from my driveway. "This is harassment. I'm the HOA president. He has to share community resources. This is unlawful arrest." I watched as they put her in the back of the cruiser and drove away. Several neighbors had come out to watch the scene, including Marcus, who jogged over to my house. "What happened, man?" I explained everything, showing him the cables and the security footage. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. She's completely lost it. The board needs to remove her immediately. Is that something they can do? It's in the bylaws. If a board member is arrested, the board can vote to remove them pending the outcome of the legal case. I'll make some calls. Over the weekend, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. My doorbell rang constantly with neighbors wanting to know what happened or expressing support. Apparently, Brenda had been making enemies for years with her aggressive enforcement of petty rules and her tendency to fine people for minor infractions. On Sunday afternoon, I was removing the unauthorized cables from my property when a news van pulled up. A reporter named Jennifer Vasquez from a local Phoenix station approached me with a cameraman. "Mr. Lawson, we heard about the HOA situation. Would you be willing to give an interview?" I hesitated, but then figured the truth should be told. Sure, why not? The interview aired that evening on the local news. They used the headline, "HOA President Arrested After Attempting to Steal Neighbor's Heating System." The piece included my security footage, which I'd given them permission to use, and interviews with several other neighbors who shared their own horror stories about Brenda's behavior as HOA president. On Monday morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman identified herself as Patricia Morrison, the vice president of the HOA board. "Mr. Lawson, I want to apologize on behalf of the board. We had an emergency meeting last night and voted to remove Brenda as president. We're also dropping all fines against you and will be reimbursing you for the damaged lock and any other expenses you incurred." "I appreciate that, Patricia, but I need to know this won't happen again." "It won't. We're also voting to revise our bylaws to prevent this kind of overreach. Several board members are resigning, and we'll be holding new elections next month. I hope you'll consider running." "I'll think about it," I said, though I wasn't sure I wanted to get involved in HOA politics. The next few weeks were relatively calm. Brenda was charged with multiple counts of trespassing, criminal mischief, and attempted theft of services. Her lawyer tried to argue that she believed she had the authority as HOA president, but the prosecutor wasn't buying it, especially with the video evidence showing her cutting locks and breaking into my property. Then, in early February, I received something that made my jaw drop. It was a bill, sent from Brenda's personal address, charging me $12,000 for consulting services, property assessment, and HVAC engineering analysis related to my geothermal system. The bill was professionally formatted and included line items like site assessment for $2,000, system integration planning for $4,000, and community center heating solution design for $6,000. At the bottom, it demanded payment within 30 days. I stared at the bill in disbelief. She was actually trying to charge me for trespassing on my property and attempting to steal my heating system. The audacity was breathtaking. I called David immediately. "You won't believe what just landed in my mailbox." After I explained, David was silent for a moment, then he started laughing. "She's charging you for the work she did to try to steal from you. This is either genius or insanity." "What do I do?" "Nothing, don't pay it. This is clearly fraudulent." "But save it because it's evidence of her state of mind. It might actually help the criminal case against her." 2 weeks later, after I obviously didn't pay Brenda's ridiculous bill, she called the police claiming I owed her money and was refusing to pay for services rendered. The officer who responded, a veteran cop named Officer Davis, listened to Brenda's complaint and then asked to hear my side. I showed him the entire timeline: the original demand for my heating system, The security footage of her breaking into my property, the arrest reports, the fraudulent bill, all of it. Officer Davis's expression went from neutral to increasingly concerned as he reviewed everything. "Madam, you can't bill someone for illegal activities," he told Brenda. "This isn't a civil matter. You're attempting to collect payment for trespassing and property damage. That's not how this works." He used my expertise. I organized the assessment. Those contractors cost money. Brenda was practically screaming now. Did Mr. Lawson request these services or agree to pay for them? He should have. It was for the community. Officer Davis turned to me. "Mr. Lawson, do you want to file another report for attempted fraud?" "Absolutely." Brenda's face went pale. "Fraud? I'm not committing fraud. I did work, and I deserve to be paid. You broke into his property and tried to steal his heating system. You can't charge someone for that," Officer Davis said patiently, like he was explaining something to a child. As Officer Davis took my statement for yet another report, I couldn't help but think about how this entire situation could have been avoided if Brenda had just accepted my initial no and moved on with her life. But here we were, with multiple police reports, criminal charges, and now an attempted fraud charge on top of everything else. The situation took an even stranger turn a few days later, when I received a call from Richard Blackwell, the attorney who had sent that ridiculous letter on behalf of the HOA. He sounded tired and apologetic. "Mr. Lawson, I need to inform you that I'm no longer representing the HOA or Miss Patterson. When I originally sent that letter, I was working with limited information that Miss Patterson provided. After reviewing the actual deed and HOA bylaws, I realized there was no legal basis for her claims. I've withdrawn from the case. I appreciate you calling to tell me that. I also wanted to apologize. I should have done more thorough research before sending that letter. Miss Patterson was very insistent, and I took her at her word about the HOA provisions. That was my mistake. After that call, I thought maybe things would finally settle down. The HOA had new leadership. Brenda was facing criminal charges, and everyone seemed to understand that my heating system was my own property. I was wrong again. On a Tuesday in late February, I came home to find a lien notice posted on my front door. According to the document, Brenda had filed a mechanic's lien against my property for $12,000, claiming I owed her for the work she'd done. The lien claimed she had provided essential HVAC consultation and engineering services, and that I had refused payment. I called David immediately, and this time he wasn't laughing. "This is serious, Wesley. A fraudulent lien can cloud your title and make it difficult to refinance or sell your property. We need to file a motion to remove it immediately and possibly pursue additional charges against her." "How is she still doing this? Isn't she already facing criminal charges?" "Some people don't know when to quit. The good news is that filing a fraudulent lien is a separate crime in Arizona. This could result in additional felony charges." David filed an emergency motion to remove the lien, and we also reported it to the police. Detective Sarah Morales was assigned to investigate the expanding case against Brenda. She came to my house to interview me and review all the documentation. "Mr. Lawson, I've been a detective for 15 years, and I've never seen someone dig themselves into a hole this deep," Detective Morales said as she reviewed the timeline. "Every time she does something new, she's adding charges. The DA is building a pretty substantial case. I just want this to be over. I just want to live in my house peacefully." "I understand. We're going to need you to testify when this goes to trial, assuming she doesn't take a plea deal." The court hearing to remove the lien was scheduled for 3 weeks later. David assured me it would be straightforward since the lien was clearly fraudulent, but I was still nervous. I'd never been involved in anything like this before. Meanwhile, the new HOA board, led by Patricia Morrison, was doing damage control. They sent a letter to every homeowner apologizing for Brenda's behavior and outlining new policies to prevent board overreach. They also hired a real attorney to review all the HOA bylaws and make sure everything was legal and clear. Patricia called me personally to discuss the community center's heating situation. "Wesley, I want to be very clear that we're not asking you for anything, but I wanted you to know we've decided to install a new, properly sized heating system for the community center. We're taking out a small loan that will be paid back through HOA fees over the next 2 years. The contractor starts work next week." "That sounds like a reasonable solution," I said. "It's what we should have done from the beginning." Brenda got it in her head that there was a free solution, and she became obsessed with it. Looking at the financials, we could have easily afforded the new system. There was no reason for any of this drama. The Leon hearing arrived, and I took the day off work to attend. David met me at the courthouse in downtown Phoenix. Brenda was there with a new attorney, a harried-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he regretted taking her case. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Ramona Martinez, reviewed the case file with increasing displeasure on her face. When it was time for arguments, Brenda's attorney stood up and tried to make the case that she had provided legitimate consulting services. "Your Honor, my client organized an assessment of Mr. Lawson's heating system with the intention of benefiting the entire community. She hired contractors, coordinated meetings, and devoted significant time to this project." Judge Martinez looked at him over her reading glasses. "Counselor, did Mr. Lawson request these services?" "Well, no, Your Honor, but did he agree to pay for them?" "Not explicitly, but my client believed." "So your client trespassed on his property, attempted to access his private heating system without permission, and then sent him a bill for $12,000 for services he never requested or agreed to pay for." "When you put it like that, Your Honor, that's the only way to put it because that's what happened. This lien is fraudulent and I'm ordering it removed immediately." "Mr. Lawson, do you have an attorney present?" David stood up. "Yes, Your Honor, David Rothman representing Mr. Lawson." "Mr. Rothman, I suggest you and your client consider filing a civil suit for harassment and damages. This is one of the more egregious cases I've seen. Miss Patterson, you are ordered to pay Mr. Lawson's attorney fees for this hearing. The lien is dissolved. We're done here." The gavel came down and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But as we were leaving the courtroom, Brenda confronted me in the hallway. "This isn't over, Wesley. You owe me that money. I did real work." "Madam, I need you to step back," David said, positioning himself between us. "You think you're so smart with your fancy heating system. The community should come first. You're selfish and you're ruining the neighborhood." Security guards approached, drawn by Brenda's raised voice. One of them recognized the situation immediately. "Miss Patterson, you need to leave the courthouse. Now." As the guards escorted Brenda out, still yelling about community values and selfishness, Detective Morales appeared from around the corner. She'd apparently been in the courthouse for other business and had witnessed the confrontation. "Mr. Lawson, I'm adding harassment to the charges," she said. That was a clear violation of the no-contact order from her bail conditions. "There's a no-contact order?" I asked. "There is now. She was supposed to stay away from you. Judge Martinez just witnessed her violating it." Things moved quickly after that. Brenda's bail was revoked, and she spent 3 days in jail before her family posted a higher bond with stricter conditions. The DA's office reached out to David about the expanding case. "They're offering her a plea deal," David told me over the phone. She's looking at multiple felony charges now with the fraudulent lien and violation of the no-contact order. If she doesn't take a plea, she could face serious prison time. What kind of plea deal? Probation, restitution for your damages and legal fees, and a psychological evaluation. She'd also have to resign from any HOA positions permanently and have no contact with you for 5 years. What do you think I should do? That's up to you. If you want to push for a trial, the DA thinks they have a strong case. But trials are unpredictable, and it would drag this out for another year or more. I thought about it for a couple of days. Part of me wanted to see Brenda face the full consequences of her actions. But another part of me just wanted to move on with my life and not spend the next year dealing with court dates and testimony. I called David back. Tell them I'll accept the plea deal on one condition. The restitution has to include the market rate cost of heat for the community center. David was quiet for a moment. You want to charge her for the heat she tried to steal? She wanted to use my system to heat the community center. Let's calculate what that would have cost at market rates and include it in the restitution. If she's going to claim she deserves payment for unwanted services, then I deserve payment for the services she tried to take. David laughed. I love it. Let me run the numbers and get back to you. We worked with an independent HVAC consultant to determine what it would have cost to heat the community center using my system for the period Brenda had originally demanded. Taking into account the square footage of the building, the average winter temperatures in Scottsdale, and commercial heating rates, we calculated a monthly cost of around $2,000. Since Brenda had originally demanded access to my system starting in January and had planned to use it through March, the total came to $6,000. We added that to my actual damages, the cut locks, attorney fees, time off work for court appearances, and emotional distress. The total restitution demand came to $38,000. The DA presented this to Brenda's attorney, who apparently hit the roof, but the numbers were all justified and well documented. More importantly, if Brenda didn't accept the plea deal, she was facing trial on multiple felony charges that could result in actual prison time. 2 weeks later, Brenda accepted the plea deal. She pleaded guilty to trespassing, attempted theft of services, filing a fraudulent lien, and harassment. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, ordered to pay $38,000 in restitution, required to undergo psychological evaluation and any recommended treatment, and permanently barred from holding any HOA position. She also had a 5-year no-contact order, meaning she couldn't come near me or my property. The restitution was set up on a payment plan since Brenda didn't have $38,000 in liquid assets. She would be paying me about $1,000 a month for the next 3 years. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about the principle. She had tried to steal from me and then had the audacity to bill me for it. The fact that she was now paying market rate for the heat she tried to take felt like appropriate justice. The sentencing hearing was surreal. Brenda stood before Judge Martinez, who had been assigned the criminal case as well, and gave a tearful apology that felt hollow and rehearsed. Her attorney had clearly coached her on what to say. I realize now that I let my passion for community service cloud my judgment, Brenda said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I never meant to cause harm. I just wanted what was best for the neighborhood. Judge Martinez didn't look impressed. Miss Patterson, your actions went far beyond passion for community service. You repeatedly broke the law, harassed a neighbor, and showed no remorse until you were facing serious criminal charges. The only reason you're not going to prison is because Mr. Lawson agreed to this plea deal. I suggest you use your probation period to reflect seriously on your behavior. After the sentencing, David and I went to lunch to celebrate the end of the ordeal. You know, in all my years practicing law, I've never had a case quite like this one, he said. HOA disputes can get nasty, but this was something else entirely. I still can't believe she thought she could just take my heating system, I said. Some people get a little bit of power and lose all perspective. Being HOA president went to her head. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The new HOA board was professional and reasonable. Patricia Morrison proved to be an excellent president, focusing on actual community issues like playground maintenance and neighborhood safety, rather than petty enforcement of minor rules. The community center got its new heating system installed, and I actually attended the reopening event. Several neighbors thanked me for standing up to Brenda, and I learned that many of them had been intimidated by her for years, but had been too afraid to speak up. Marcus pulled me aside at the event. You should really consider running for the board in the next election. We need people who understand boundaries and won't abuse their authority. I'll think about it, I said, and this time I actually meant it. The restitution checks started arriving monthly, each one a reminder of the whole bizarre situation. I put the money into a savings account, not sure what to do with it yet. Eventually, I decided to use it to fund a legal defense fund for homeowners dealing with HOA overreach. There were too many stories like mine where HOAs abused their limited power, and homeowners didn't have the resources to fight back. About 6 months after the sentencing, I ran into Brenda's husband, Tom, at the grocery store. I'd always liked Tom. He was a quiet, reasonable guy who had seemed perpetually exhausted by his wife's crusades. "Wesley, I owe you an apology," Tom said when he saw me. "I should have stepped in and stopped her. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I didn't want the fight." "It's not your fault, Tom." "How is she doing?" "Better, actually. The court-ordered therapy has been good for her. She's been diagnosed with some control issues that apparently go way back. She's on medication now and actually seems calmer. We're working on things." "I'm glad to hear that. I never wanted to ruin her life. I just wanted to be left alone." "You didn't ruin her life. She did that herself. You just stood up for yourself, which you had every right to do." We talked for a few more minutes before parting ways. It was a strange encounter, but it gave me some closure. Brenda wasn't evil, she was sick. That didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained it. The story made its way around the HOA community beyond just our neighborhood. I started getting emails and calls from people in other HOAs dealing with similar issues of board overreach and abuse of power. Some of the stories were even worse than mine. One woman in Temp told me her HOA had tried to force her to remove her solar panels because they were unsightly. Another man in Mesa said his HOA had fined him $10,000 for painting his front door the wrong shade of approved beige. The stories were endless and depressing. I started writing about my experience on a blog, documenting everything that had happened and providing advice for other homeowners dealing with HOA issues. The blog got picked up by a few news outlets, and suddenly, I was being interviewed as an expert on HOA reform. A state representative named Amy Chen reached out to me about testifying before a committee that was considering HOA reform legislation. "Your story highlights a lot of the issues we're trying to address," she told me. "We need stronger protections for homeowners and clearer limits on HOA authority." I testified before the committee in August, telling my story and answering questions from the legislators. It was nerve-wracking, but also empowering to turn my nightmare experience into something that might help others. The legislation that eventually passed included several provisions inspired by cases like mine. HOAs would now face penalties for filing fraudulent liens. Homeowners would have stronger due process rights before fines could be imposed, and there were clearer definitions of what HOAs could and couldn't regulate. Meanwhile, back in my own neighborhood, the Sunset Ridge HOA had transformed under Patricia's leadership. The board started hosting quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns and ask questions. They revised the bylaws to make them clearer and more reasonable. And they implemented a dispute resolution process, so conflicts didn't immediately escalate to fines and legal action. I did end up running for the board in the next election and won a seat easily. My experience with Brenda had given me a reputation as someone who would stand up to overreach and protect homeowners' rights. I took the position seriously, reviewing every proposed fine and rule change with a careful eye toward fairness and legality. One of my first acts on the board was proposing a good neighbor policy that emphasized communication and cooperation over enforcement and penalties. If someone was violating a rule, the first step would be a friendly conversation to understand the situation, not an immediate fine. It seemed like common sense, but apparently it was revolutionary for HOA governance. The policy passed unanimously, and I started to see a real change in the neighborhood culture. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out, less fearful of petty violations and arbitrary fines. It felt like an actual community, instead of a collection of houses policed by an overzealous board. I still saw Tom occasionally at neighborhood events. He always looked healthier and happier. Brenda never returned to the neighborhood events, which was probably for the best given the no-contact order. I heard through the grapevine that she'd gotten involved in volunteering at a local food bank, channeling her energy into something productive rather than trying to control her neighbors. The restitution payments continued like clockwork, $1,000 every month. I watched the legal defense fund grow and started helping people navigate HOA disputes. Some cases I could resolve with a simple letter from David explaining the law. Others required more extensive involvement. One case that particularly stood out was a young couple, Danny and Rachel Foster, who lived 3 neighborhoods over. Their HOA was trying to force them to remove a wheelchair ramp they'd installed for Rachel's elderly father who had moved in with them. The HOA claimed it violated the architectural guidelines. I connected them with David, who took the case pro bono with the legal fund covering expenses. It turned out that under the Fair Housing Act, the HOA couldn't prevent reasonable modifications for disabled residents. The case was settled quickly, with the HOA backing down and agreeing to update their policies. Rachel called me in tears after the resolution. "You saved us. We couldn't have afforded to fight this without your help. My father would have been trapped in the house." Those moments made everything I'd gone through with Brenda worth it. My experience had been awful, but it had taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself and using your experience to help others. As the 1-year anniversary of Brenda's first appearance at my door approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. I'd gone from a quiet HVAC engineer who just wanted to live peacefully in his house to an HOA board member and advocate for homeowner rights. It wasn't a role I'd ever imagined for myself, but it felt right. The local news station that had originally covered the story reached out to do a follow-up piece. Jennifer Vasquez, the reporter, came to my house for an interview. "So, Wesley, looking back at everything that happened, what would you say you learned?" she asked. "I learned that standing up for yourself is important, even when it's uncomfortable. I also learned that most people are reasonable if you give them a chance to be." Brenda was an exception, but she was dealing with untreated mental health issues. The new HOA board has been great, and the neighborhood is better than ever. Do you regret pressing charges? No, Brenda needed to face consequences for her actions. But I'm glad the plea deal included therapy for her because she clearly needed help. I don't wish her ill. I just wanted her to stop violating my rights and leave me alone. What advice would you give to other homeowners dealing with HOA issues? Document everything. Know your rights and your HOA's actual authority, which is usually much more limited than they claim. Don't be afraid to get legal help if you need it, and try to work with reasonable people on your board to make changes from within if possible. The follow-up story aired in early February, almost exactly 1 year after the original incident. It included interviews with Patricia and several other neighbors, all talking about how the neighborhood had improved since Brenda's removal. A few days after the story aired, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Brenda, forwarded through her attorney to comply with the no-contact order. David reviewed it first to make sure it wasn't threatening or harassing. The letter was surprisingly thoughtful. Brenda apologized again, this time in a way that felt genuine rather than coached. She explained that therapy had helped her understand that she'd been using HOA involvement as a way to feel in control of her life when other things felt chaotic. She talked about her father's death 2 years earlier and how she'd thrown herself into being HOA president as a way to avoid dealing with her grief. She wrote that she understood why I'd pressed charges and didn't blame me for it. She said the court-ordered treatment had probably saved her marriage and helped her become a better person. She ended by saying she hoped I was doing well and that she was glad the neighborhood had good leadership now. I read the letter several times, feeling a mix of emotions. Anger at what she'd put me through, sadness for what she'd been dealing with, and relief that she seemed to be getting better. I decided not to respond, given the no-contact order, but I appreciated that she'd written it. Life continued to move forward. My geothermal system continued to heat and cool my house efficiently, saving me hundreds of dollars a month on energy costs. The community center's new heating system worked perfectly. The neighborhood thrived under reasonable HOA leadership. I started dating someone I met at an HOA reform conference, which felt very on brand for where my life had gone. Her name was Jennifer Lange, and she was a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA law. We bonded over war stories about ridiculous HOA rules and power-hungry board members. "Your story is legendary in HOA law circles," Jennifer told me on our third date. "I use it as a teaching example in the seminars I run about HOA overreach." "I never wanted to be famous for fighting with my HOA," I said, laughing. "Well, you're making a difference. That legislation you helped pass has already prevented dozens of cases like yours." The restitution payments continued through the second year and into the third. I had helped 7 families fight back against unreasonable HOA actions using the Legal Defense Fund. Each case reminded me why I'd fought back against Brenda in the first place. One evening in late fall, about 2.5 years after the initial incident, Patricia called me with unexpected news. "Wesley, I wanted to give you a heads up before the next board meeting. We're discussing whether to invite Brenda back to neighborhood events. Her probation is almost up, and she's completed all her requirements. Some people think enough time has passed." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think people deserve second chances, but I also think we need to respect your feelings. She terrorized you, and the no-contact order exists for a reason." "When does the no-contact order expire?" "In about 5 months, when her probation ends." I thought about it for a while. I don't have any desire to interact with her, but I'm not going to dictate whether she can attend neighborhood events. If she stays away from me and my property, I don't care what she does, but I'll probably skip events she's at. That's fair. I'll make sure everyone knows the boundaries. The final restitution check arrived in March, 3 years after the sentencing. It was a strange moment, marking the official end of the financial aspect of the case. The legal defense fund had grown to over $40,000 with the restitution payments and donations from people who'd heard my story. I organized a small celebration at my house with Marcus, David, Jennifer, Patricia, and a few other neighbors who had supported me through everything. We grilled burgers in my backyard, the geothermal system humming quietly in the background, efficiently maintaining the perfect temperature in my house. To Wesley, Marcus said, raising his beer, for standing up to HOA tyranny and making our neighborhood better. And for having the best heating system in Scottsdale, David added with a grin. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. As I looked around at the friends I'd made through this bizarre experience, I realized that despite everything, I was grateful for how things had turned out. I'd found my voice, made a difference in my community, and helped create positive change. My quiet life as an HVAC engineer had been disrupted by an HOA Karen who demanded my heat, tried to steal it, and then called the cops when I charged her market rate for what she'd attempted to take. But in fighting back, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had and a purpose beyond just going to work and coming home. Brenda's probation officially ended in late April. I heard from Patricia that she'd started attending some neighborhood events again, staying on the opposite side of the room from me when we were at the same function. We never spoke or acknowledged each other, which suited me fine. The Legal Defense Fund continued helping families fight back against HOA overreach. I started teaching workshops on homeowner rights, using my experience to educate others about what HOAs could and couldn't do legally. Jennifer and I got serious about our relationship, eventually moving in together at her house in Chandler. I kept my house in Scottsdale, though, with its efficient geothermal system that had inadvertently become the center of a neighborhood saga. Sometimes I'd drive past the community center and see people inside enjoying events in a properly heated building with its own system. I'd think about how simple it would have been if Brenda had just accepted that solution from the beginning, instead of fixating on stealing mine. But then, I'd remember the families I'd helped, the legislation that had passed, the positive changes in HOA governance across Arizona, and I'd realize that sometimes bad situations lead to good outcomes. Brenda's obsession with my heating system had started a chain of events that made life better for thousands of homeowners. I never did understand what made her think she could just take my geothermal system. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was untreated mental health issues. Maybe it was just the intoxication of unchecked power. Whatever it was, she'd paid the price for it, both legally and personally. As for me, I'd learned that standing up for yourself isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. I'd learned that documentation and evidence are your best friends in any dispute. I'd learned that most people are reasonable if given the chance. And I'd learned that sometimes the worst experiences in life can lead you to discover strengths and purposes you never knew you had. My fancy geothermal system continued to keep my house at the perfect temperature, efficiently and economically, just as I designed it to do. And nobody, not the HOA, not Brenda, not anyone, would ever try to take it from me again. The story could have ended badly. Brenda could have done serious damage to my property or my finances. The HOA could have backed her up and made my life a living hell. I could have given in to avoid conflict and let her walk all over me, but none of those things happened. Instead, I stood my ground, documented everything, got proper legal representation, and fought back against an absurd abuse of power. The system worked eventually. Justice was served even if it took longer than it should have. Years later, when people ask me about the HOA heating system scandal, as it's become known in local HOA reform circles, I tell them it wasn't really about the heating system at all. It was about boundaries, respect, and the importance of pushing back against people who think their authority extends beyond its actual limits. And if there's one thing I hope people take away from my experience, it's this. Don't let anyone bully you into giving up what's yours. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. The Brendas of the world count on people being too intimidated or too tired to fight back. When you refuse to be intimidated, when you stand your ground and demand that the law be followed, they usually crumble. My geothermal system still runs perfectly, heating and cooling my house with impressive efficiency. The community center has its own system that works just fine. The HOA is run by reasonable people who respect boundaries and follow the law. And I've helped dozens of other homeowners stand up to their own HOA Karens. It wasn't the story I expected my heating system to generate when I installed it all those years ago. But it's the story that happened, and I'm proud of how I handled it. Standing up to Brenda Patterson, demanding justice, and ultimately charging her market rate for the services she tried to steal wasn't just about principle. It was about drawing a line and saying that some behavior is unacceptable, no matter who you are or what position you hold. And that's a lesson worth far more than $12,000 or a fancy geothermal heating system. It's a lesson about dignity, self-respect, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to just go along. That's the real story of how an HOA Karen demanded my heat, and how I made sure she paid for every BTU she tried to take.